Welcome to Metal Music Theory. In this series, I'm going to explain the most important concepts of music theory that you need to know as a metal musician to help you to understand songs better and, most importantly, to write better songs faster. I recently put out a poll to my viewers asking you what topics you're most interested in seeing, and so far this is tied in the lead with the most votes, which is great because it's the one that I'm most excited to talk about. And if you missed that poll, I'll put a link in the description. You should go fill it out, and I look forward to hearing from you. In this first episode, I'm going to talk about scales and chords. And you may feel like this is basic stuff that you already know, but it's always worth a refresher because I may explain things in a way you haven't heard before, or you may have missed something along the way in your own studies. So what is music theory and why do we need it? Put simply, music theory is the study of music. It's a framework for understanding and communicating about music with other musicians. You can think of it as the science of music without getting into the actual science of physics. I've heard people say they don't want to study music theory because they're afraid it will make them think inside the box, but that isn't true. Music theory is descriptive, not prescriptive. In other words, it's a framework for understanding, analyzing, and communicating musical concepts, not a set of rules that you have to follow to make a good song. As the saying goes, you need to know the rules in order to break them. And as metal musicians, we like to subvert listeners' expectations and do things that are new and experimental and interesting. But understanding common tropes and practices will help us to do so in a way that comes across as interesting rather than amateur. I'd much rather someone say, "Wow, that was a cool key change," rather than, "This guy doesn't know what key he's in." Like anything else, understanding and applying music theory takes time and practice. It's worth it to rewatch certain sections if you don't understand it the first time, and take notes and find some worksheets online where you can do some practice just like you would if this was a college course. Even as I'm making this and having taught a lot of this stuff for years, I'm still finding that it settles into my brain in new ways and gets me thinking and gets me honing my skills and knowledge in the world of theory. So treat it as a journey rather than a destination. Let's start with the basics: pitch and rhythm. Pitch is how high or low a note is, and rhythm is how long it's played. The term note can be either or both of these aspects. For example, you can talk about quarter notes, which is rhythm, or the note A, which is pitch. I'm not going to get into non-standard tuning and temperament here, I may in another video, but we'll assume a modern concert pitch of A440 and equal temperament because that's what the vast majority of music uses. A440 is the standard tuning pitch, and the number 440 is the cycles per second, or hertz. 1 hertz would be 1 cycle per second, which is far too low to be perceived as a musical pitch. The human hearing range is from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. As you age or listen to really loud music, your ears stop hearing those highest frequencies. The important part here is to remember that an octave is exactly double the frequency of the lower note. Our A4, which is 440 hertz, is twice the frequency, or speed, of A3, which is 220 hertz. And A5 is 880 hertz. We label octaves with a number starting at A0, the lowest note on the piano, or 27.5 hertz, up to the highest note on the piano, C8, or 4,186 hertz. Again, the takeaway here is that an octave up is double the frequency, and an octave down is half the frequency. This also comes into play when we use equalizers to alter sounds when mixing music. We also use an equal temperament system, which means we divide that octave equally into 12 half steps, and all of our scales and chords are built around that. So what are scales and chords? A scale is a certain set of notes out of those 12 half steps that make up our octave, and a scale repeats the same way throughout all the octaves. One thing that took a while to click for me is that all the chords in a scale, or a key signature to be more accurate, are built off those same notes. So it's actually very easy to figure out what chords go in what scale. Also, all the different modes come out of that same set of notes and chords, just in a different order. If you know how a major scale works, You also know how a minor scale and the other 5 modes work too. This alone should make the task of memorizing scales and modes much less intimidating. The term key signature refers to the scale a piece of music is written around. Some songs may change key signatures in parts, meaning they switch to a different scale and its associated chords, and you could use a scale that's different from the main key for something like a solo, but that's getting into more advanced territory, and I highly recommend you master the basics of writing in one key before skipping to changing keys or writing atonal music. Just because you stay in one key doesn't mean you have to write a simple basic song. There's plenty of great and highly sophisticated advanced music that's written all in one key. So don't think you need to start adding different keys and scales from other keys into your music to make it interesting. You don't, but you can. And it can be interesting if it's done well, but it's hard. Setting yourself some limitations or rules can help you to push boundaries and think about things in a different way than if you were to just do whatever comes naturally to you. So it's a good idea to try things out and purposefully limit yourself so that you can be creative in some areas that maybe you wouldn't otherwise be creative in. All of the modes, which includes your minor scale, are made out of the same notes as a major scale, just starting and ending on a different note. 2 different major scales, like C major and G major, contain different notes, but the same pattern for constructing them. A mode contains the same notes, but a different pattern. Again, knowing how a major scale works also gives you access to the minor scale and all the modes, as well as all the chords in that key. So what we're going to focus on is that pattern. I'm going to use the piano keyboard here because it's much simpler visually than guitar. But don't worry if you don't play piano, it's very simple. We'll start with C major because it's only the white keys and it's easy to follow along with. C major contains the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. As you can see, some notes have a black key in the middle and some don't. From one note to the next is a half step. So we can figure out the pattern for a major scale using these half steps. From C to D is a whole step, from D to E is a whole step, from E to F is a half step, from F to G is a whole step, from G to A is a whole step, from A to B is a whole step, and from B to C is a half step. This gives us a pattern of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. We can also use this to build our chords. A major or minor chord is a triad or 3-note chord. These chords in C major look like this: C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished. The difference between a major and minor chord is only one note, the third. A major chord has a major third, and a minor chord has a minor third, which is a half step lower. That diminished chord has a minor third and a diminished fifth, or a flat 5 in jazz terms, which is a half step lower than a perfect fifth. Another very useful way to think about all this is in scale degrees. So forget about all the note names for a second, we're going to use Roman numerals instead. You've probably heard people talking about chord progressions this way, like a 1-4-5. In C major, that would be C major, the 1, F major, the 4, and G major, the 5. A capital numeral means major, and a lowercase means minor, so our major scale looks like this: major 1, minor 2, minor 3, major 4, major 5, minor 6, and diminished 7th. The diminished chord also gets a degree symbol to separate it from a normal minor chord. Now, we don't use the major scale in metal a whole lot, but as I said, it's really the same as the minor scale, which we do use a lot. The minor scale is the 6th mode, the 6th mode or 6th scale degree. The natural minor key, or relative minor of a major key, is the 6th mode or 6th degree of the scale. Starting at C again for 1, we count up to 6 using the notes of that key. So C, D, E, F, G, A. There are variations of a minor scale, like harmonic minor, but this one is the natural minor, and if someone talks about a minor scale, natural minor is the one they typically mean. We have the same notes as the C major scale, so again, no black keys, just A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Let's build the chords from that, and they're the same chords as C major, just starting in a different place. A minor, B diminished, C major, D minor, E minor, F major, and G major. Now, if we write that as scale degrees, we end up with this: 1 minor, 2 diminished, 3 major, 4 minor, 5 minor, 6 major, and 7 major. So while our 1-4-5 progression in C major was all major, that is C major, F major, and G major, our 1-4-5 progression in A minor is all minor: A minor, D minor, and E minor. And I chose this progression because the 1, 4, and 5 chords are the most important to a key, and the other chords are there to help add extra flavor and movement. Specifically, the 5 chord resolving to the 1 chord is the most important movement in all of music, and you'll find it all over the place. If we think of our 1 chord as the home chord, the 5 chord is the climax that typically leads back home. The 5 chord, or especially 5-7, is just begging to be resolved back to 1. The 4 chord I think of as the adventure chord that leads away from home somewhere else, and other chords can function that way too. Either back to the 5 chord or to another chord like the 6 chord, which often leads back to 5, which leads back to 1. These are not rules, just how chords are commonly used. We can use these chords to add emotional structure to our music before we even add a melody. Let's take our very basic 1-5-1 progression to start. It's fine, but notice that there's all this resolution without any real point for it, so it kind of feels like it's not really going anywhere, even though it does have that strong movement of resolution, but there's no reason for it to resolve either. If we do the same thing in A minor, it sounds like this. Even though it now has a sadder character, it still feels like it doesn't really have any movement going on. So let's try adding in our 4 chord. It's nothing mind-blowing, but it's got a lot more interesting movement, and by the time we resolve from 5 to 1, it feels much more satisfying than it did before. Here's how it sounds in minor. Now let's add our 6 chord in for even more flavor, which will lead us to the most overused chord progression of all time, the 1-5-6-4. And now in minor. That simple switch to minor made that same overused chord progression that you've heard a million times sound like something more new, interesting, and fresh. And that's where I want you to start thinking about modes as a songwriting tool. But I'm going to save that for the next installment where I'm going to go into more depth on the modes. So to wrap this up, let's put this into practice in a riff. My melody line here is a repeating 1, 2, 3, and we're thinking in scale degrees, not fret numbers. This is just sort of a generic metalcore style riff, and I'm going to start with open chugs, and then we're going to make it a little more advanced. That riff is pretty boring, and it would need a longer melody in order for it to work. But instead of changing the melody, I'm just going to change the low notes to imply a chord progression, even though they're single notes, and we're going to use that same minor 1, 5, 6, 4 progression from earlier. Theory-wise, it's still a pretty basic riff, but that one simple change makes the riff a whole lot more interesting. And as a bonus, we can easily write a chorus by just strumming out those chords that we already have in the verse riff. And I can add in a little pre-chorus using the same chords as well. And how about a breakdown? Every song needs a breakdown. So let's put it all together and check out the song. Thanks for watching to the end, and if you want some more inspiration for writing chord progressions, I'd take a look at some chord progression flowcharts. They're kind of interesting little charts you can follow for minor and major keys, and they might help you to come up with some chord progressions that you wouldn't otherwise come up with on your own. Now, I learn best when I put these concepts into practice, which means writing riffs around ideas, writing songs around ideas, and just getting a particular concept in music theory into my brain by writing some music around it. I find it's a good way to be inspired to write a song if I have a particular concept that I want to work on, a tidbit of music theory info that I can then turn into a song. And sometimes that's a great starting point if you don't already have an idea for a song and maybe you're feeling like you're in a rut. I think theory is a great way to get out of that because you can take an idea and just sort of look at it from an outsider and say, well, how would I write a song around that chord progression or around this key? That's where the metal meets the road. The rubber meets the road usually, but we're doing metal here. So that's what I've got for you today. Stay tuned for the next episode. Don't forget to subscribe. And we're going to be talking about modes next. So I hope to see you there.